Curbsiders Teach podcast is for entertainment, education, and information purposes only, and the topics discussed should not be used solely to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases or conditions.
Furthermore, the views and statements expressed on this podcast are solely those of the speakers and should not be interpreted to reflect the official policy or position of any entity. You should always do your homework and give us any feedback.
Welcome back to the Curbsiders Teach Season 4, the podcast for health professions educators. I'm Dr. Molly Hoybline, joined in person by my co-host, Dr. Ira Kurzhanovskaya. On today's episode, we'll discuss artificial intelligence and its applications to medical education. Before we get started with that, Ira, will you remind the audience what we do on this show?
Of course, Molly. We are the clinician educator podcast for all things health professions education. We use expert interviews to bring you teaching pearls and practice-changing knowledge to inspire the next generation of clinician educators. We have a great conversation with our guests, Dr. Rodman, Turner, and Fortman today. We cover all things AI. It brings this noob to AI up at least one level of development and knowledge. And we talk about what are large language models. We talk about how to use them as clinician educators, how they can hallucinate, positives, opportunities. We really just cover it all.
It was an amazing discussion, and our three guests are really wonderful. It was fantastic to sit down with them in person. We have Dylan Fortman, MD. He is a current internal medicine chief resident at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and is planning to start hematology-oncology fellowship this summer. He's enthusiastic about advancing both clinical research in hemonc and his ongoing medical education endeavors through his fellowship and future career.
And then we have Adam Rodman, MD. He is a general internist and hospitalist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. He's an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and the co-director for IMED Initiative at BI, which is dedicated to the study and best practices of digital education and artificial intelligence. His research focuses on clinical reasoning and the human-computer connection.
And finally, we have Laurah Turner, PhD. She is the Assistant Dean for Assessment and Evaluation at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. She is a passionate advocate for social justice and education, continuously seeking innovative ways to drive impactful systems of change through inventive data collection, analysis, and fostering innovation in the field of medical education.
So we are so excited to bring you this season of Curbsiders Teach with the support of and in partnership with the Alliance of Academic Internal Medicine. A reminder that most episodes are available for CME credit through VCU Health CE for all health professionals at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. Thank you to all our Patreon members. And if you love all the Curbsiders family content, but you haven't joined yet, please consider supporting us and continuing to create this amazing resource. So, without further ado, let's get to it.
Well, thank you to the three of you for taking the time out of the conference today to sit down with us. We're really excited to talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, Dr. Rodman, we'll start with you. Are you okay if we call you Adam for this recording?
Please call me Adam. I was going to correct you even if you didn't.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear, how's the conference going for you so far? Have there been any things that have really impressed you or really excited you today?
So this happens every year at AIM, but the enthusiasm of all of the new chief residents coming in and seeing how a lot of people are alive and excited, and the reaction is people are really excited for the future of academic internal medicine, which I am generally excited about. I love the optimism in the future looking.
I love that. And could you share, Adam, even more kind of granularly what surprised you or what you've kind of really noticed about this particular conference?
I am a medical education researcher, but a lot of my research focuses on clinical reasoning and decision-making. And often audiences are, I don't want to say hostile, but much more anxiety-prone about the future of our field, even though, to be clear, we're not getting replaced by machines anytime soon. But usually there's a lot more anxiety. And the vibes that I have gotten from all the people I've talked to at AIM this year have been, accepting that there's some uncomfortable things, but seeing the power and the promise and being really enthusiastic about how we as academic internists can really, take control. And this is an opportunity where other technologies have been foisted upon us, the EHR, where we actually have an opportunity as academics, as academic internists, and all health professional educators to not necessarily control, because no one knows what's going to happen, but to lead the way in using our domain knowledge to make things better for us and our patients.
Love that. I hope we can take that energy, enthusiasm, harness it, and create some, frameworks and approaches for educators to use AI. Maybe we'll turn to Dr. Laurah Turner. Are you okay if we call you Laura for this recording?
Of course.
Awesome. Well, we heard from Adam, but I want to hear from you. What brought you to the topic of AI and kind of to this conference today?
So I've actually been in this field for a really long time, like before anyone was calling it AI. Like when I started, it wasn't even called machine learning yet. And to be clear, I'm a PhD. I'm not an MD, and my background it's odd. It's in biomedical anthropology, but I had a strong focus on machine learning and statistics and analytics. And so that's kind of the lens that all of my work has been filtered through in my career. So we've been working in this space a long time. We've been working to see how we can not only use all of the data that is generated by our learners, but also structured and unstructured data. And so by unstructured, what I mean is like narrative text, right? Stuff that you can't just calculate with Excel. And, as of the release of GPT by OpenAI in 2022, our work has all of a sudden become really sexy. So people are paying attention, which is super fun. And we've been kind of building platforms to integrate generative AI and marry a bunch of different AI techniques, not just generative AI, to actualize precision medical education. Right? How do we focus on the learner's needs and adapt our curriculum instead of the learner adapting to the curriculum? So we actually were really fortunate to be able to present our test pilot, our platform here today with a couple of my other colleagues, Dr. Kelleher and Dr. Weber.
Amazing. Well, we're very excited to learn more. And Dr. Fortman, are you okay if we call you Dylan today?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you. How has it been for you here at the conference? How did your session go?
Session went really well. Everyone was very enthusiastic. We did a session on AI and morning report, so it was really nice to have rising chief residents practice large language models and how we can incorporate it into the morning report from a medical education standpoint. So that was fun. And it's good to be back. As a prior rising chief, it's nice to see all the current rising chiefs all enthusiastic and ready to take things back to their institutions.
Amazing. Well, I think this will be a really fun conversation, hearing from all of you coming from different perspectives and different experiences with AI. We'll start off with a case from Cashlack Memorial, and I had chatbot GPT write this for me. Dr. Patel, a seasoned clinician educator at Cashlack Memorial Hospital, is eager to harness artificial intelligence to enhance the learning experience of third-year medical students during their rounds. However, faced with a multitude of AI options and lacking guidance on implementation, Dr. Patel seeks practical advice on selecting and integrating AI tools tailored to their teaching context and student needs. So, Adam, we'll start with you. To take a step back, I'm curious why in your plenary today you used the term large language models instead of artificial intelligence or generative AI that I feel like the media more frequently uses. And in a basic sense, can you help us understand what these are?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit like Laura in that I've actually been doing reasoning research for many years and just no one cared about it really until last year. Yeah, I think we have that very similar. So AI historically, what is artificial intelligence? The word artificial intelligence dates back to the 50s, and we've been talking about medical artificial intelligence for a long time. I don't want to be the spoiler here. AI doesn't really that's not true. It means something. But if you look at like expert systems from the 60s, which was state of the art, actually you go back, you look at Ledley and Lusted, 1959. Sorry to get all historical here, but the AI system there was effectively what you would use now in MD Calc, right? It's a very naive Bayesian algorithm. If you ever calculated a 4T score per hit, you've used AI as it would have been originally defined. And then like the ACLS algorithm, right? That is an expert system. That would have been called an AI. So AI, it is a name that is used to get people very excited because of like Mr. Data from Star Trek. But I don't use that term except to talk very broadly about decision support because I imagine Laura agrees with me. It doesn't really mean anything. A large language model is a very specific type of machine learning algorithm that generates, and I won't get into the technical pieces, but it generates realistic output, textual output from human input. And generative AI doesn't really mean anything either. It has more meaning than others in the sense that it's not just like classifying, it's doing more than classifying, it's creating something, but the technologies that go into it are also quite different. When I'm talking about, especially in my field, reasoning, making decisions, I'm always very explicit that I'm talking about large language models to make that distinction. And a lot of the work actually that's happened in medical education has been other types of machine learning algorithms that are not large language models.
And actually, it's a great transition. Laura, maybe in your kind of perspective, how do large language models or AI compare to machine learning? And kind of how do you, in deep learning and artificial neural networks, how do you kind of make sense of all these words that I feel like are just buzzwords that I'm repeating?
Yeah, so as Adam just said, large language models are a subset of machine learning, and they fall into the category of deep learning. They use something called neural networks, which on a very, very high level try to mimic the human brain. But at that point, that's kind of where the similarities end. And so what happens is, unlike a lot of other types of techniques that fall under the huge umbrella of AI or even machine learning, these neural networks and large language models are a little bit different in that the very inner workings of them are what a lot of people in the general media refer to as a black box, or more appropriately termed unexplainable AI, meaning we don't exactly know what's going on. And that's where a lot of kind of the hesitation, I think, comes from. If you can't explain something, then how can you trust it, right? And so that's where, a fundamental understanding of how these terms all fit together and, why large language models and AI are not exactly the same thing as Adam was talking about is really important, because understanding what the model can appropriately do or not do, how it can be explained or not explained, and the risks involved in that is really important when, in the scenario that you started with, adopting, what model do I use for, my clinical presentations.
Well, that perfectly led us into what model should we use? I think many of us are familiar with ChatGPT, but maybe haven't used it much or aren't too familiar with other options that might be better choices for clinicians. Adam, do you have a specific recommendation of a platform that a medical educator should try, play around with?
You're not going to like the answer. It's what do you want to get out of it? And I think I can assume from your question that you're going to be doing some sort of, you want human-like text output, is my guess from the situation. If you do,
yeah, I guess so.
To ask the audience, it's going to be, we're now spoiled for frontier models. There's GPT-4, there's Claude 3, there's Gemini, and Llama 3 is coming out next month, right? Which will be very exciting because open source models have really lagged behind the commercial models. So if we'll see, we may be spoiled with 4 equivalent language models that an educator could choose from.
And is there a way to distinguish between those 4? Or is there just cute names like llama and, things that we just need to remember?
Is there a way to distinguish? Does someone else want to take this question? Because I'm going to get way too technical.
Yeah, I think, to not get too technical, I think it also depends on what you're trying to do. It takes a lot of playing around with them. So, for example, I used to use GPT-4 all the time, and now I'm using Claude Opus a lot more because GPT uses a lot of very identifiable language. It sounds like to me you're talking to an AI. With Llama, it's just not the output. You have to work a lot more. And so if somebody is not experienced, it could be quite frustrating. Another one that, we've spent a lot of time with is the French model, Mistral, and they have a couple of different really strong models. It just depends. There are also some open source ones that are specific to medicine. And if you're not looking to generate, real life conversations, those might be appropriate for what you're looking for. And so I would just really encourage people to understand the limitations of the model and the strengths and then make their decisions that way.
I should clarify, because Molly and I were joking around about this, but I am such an AI noob. I have physically not gone to ChatGPT and put anything in. So when you think about Dr. Patel, pretend like it's Ira, actually, and she's trying to tailor, and you said, Adam, earlier, it depends on what you want to get out of it. Well, let's say what I want to get out of it is kind of a approach to a teaching session, which Dylan will get into in a little bit about your kind of morning report integration. But is there a particular of the, French one versus the cutesy but not very effective llama one, that you would suggest I try, at the first go?
GPT-4 for something like that, it works well. It just fundamentally, it works pretty well. You have to check everything with AI. And as long as you go in with that lens, also it's cost effective. Claude and if you're just doing the interface and ChatGPT and OpenAI stuff, they cost the same. It's $20 a month.
Gemini too, also $20 a month. It's like they're paying attention to each other.
I think it really depends also on the person. I am not a fan of any Gemini anything. It's just not as good as Anthropic or OpenAI stuff. But Yeah.
So we have some of our diagnostic bench. So this gets to what you're using it for. So in the diagnostic benchmarks, Gemini is doing
That's a very good point. That is a very good point.
But I would actually say for your average, for text summarization and the context window and accuracy within the context window, Claude 3 Opus is amazing.
It's so
I
good.
use Claude 3 so much more than I used to now.
So yeah, I didn't do it on purpose. I just like, I wanted to battle them, and then I just have noticed over the last month, I used to do everything with GPT, and now I do everything with Claude.
So I've had the same. I'm 50-50, but I've had the same sort of Oh, sorry. This is
Sorry.
I would echo a lot of the points that were made. No, I would say I feel like for young learners who are maybe not accustomed with AI like myself a year ago, I would say it's fun to play around, see what works well, see what you're looking for in terms of trying to get out of the AI, and go from there would be my advice for young learners.
Love it. And most of these that we've talked about so far are just using, we don't exactly know, but like a lot of texts that are available on the internet. Is that fair to say?
not just the internet, a lot of stolen copyrighted material too.
But then there are some that are specific, more like PubMed references, like open evidence.
Oh, well, that uses retrieval augmented generation. That's not the base model. PubMed, a GPT-3 had an index of all publicly available abstracts on PubMed. So that's in there. I'm not aware that any have the training papers of PubMed, right? Because the original MedPalm paper had a database that has the abstracts. I don't remember the name of the database, but
I don't remember either.
they all have
Something like
names.
that,
Med something.
Well, I think as we think about kind of applying all of this to people who are going to be educators and clinician educators, I think if we want to focus in on using AI for clinician educators, maybe Dylan, you could take us through kind of your session today was using AI in morning reports to help clinical reasoning, which is a fantastic example of that integration of also what Adam talked about in the plenary about digital kind of media and digital education into our teaching. Could you talk us through what that looks like in practicality? Like what does a chief resident or maybe a faculty who's advising a chief resident, how do they do this? How do they integrate AI into their reports?
Yeah, so I would say the focus of our workshop and what I've used in real time with residents at my institution is sort of trying to culminate facets of clinical reasoning, things like semantic qualifiers, the problem representations of how we think about patients, and then also trying to explain some of the core facets of large language models and incorporate those together. So for example, we know with large language models that depending on the prompt you get, the output could be very different. If your prompt is short, large, depending on what you put into it, the output can be different. And so when we think about patients clinically, when we're framing a patient in our mind or on paper, depending on what we put into that sort of problem representation or a summary statement of a patient, we can think about the patient clinically a little bit different each time. And so how can we meld that together with large language models, which sort of do similar things? We know that diagnostic error is a huge contributor of patient cost, medical healthcare cost. And so framing patients clinically in our mind from a critical thinking standpoint, I think can help reduce diagnostic error. So in action, we've asked, and during the workshop today, we had sort of different cases of problem representations that the learners can put together, plug those into ChatGPT and see what the differential diagnosis can be, and sort of play around with, if you change small things, how does the output change? And so when you're applying that from a medical education standpoint, you can apply that to patients that you're discussing, but also thinking about the outputs. If you don't agree with them in terms of differential diagnosis, why don't you agree with that? And I think that's a huge educational opportunity, is thinking about things that fit, things that don't fit. And you can really, shape your learners' mentality of, critically thinking about their patients in that way. So I think one classic example is the semantic qualifier of acute versus chronic. If I have a patient with acute diarrhea or acute cough versus chronic, that changes how I think about my patients. And large language models, if you would prompt them similarly, they can sort of check your work, you can check their work. And I agree that you do have to verify the work of the AI. But it's nice to sort of have that pair together in medical education for sure.
And is this something that you put into action this year as chief?
Yeah, I have. I would say the first few sessions, it was just getting the residents kind of acclimated. I think I was humbled today that a lot of people in the session have used ChatGPT, but like the clinical reasoning behind the marriage of those two in terms of semantic qualifiers or problem representations, not a ton of people were really familiar with those terms. So getting my residents in Morning Report to get used to that kind of language, and then using it from a practicality standpoint of we have our problem representation of our patient for the day. Let's plug it into ChatGPT. Let's compare and contrast what we were thinking as a group. ChatGPT, does it fit? Does it not fit? And I think that is like a good educational tool that can be used.
I have to say, Dylan, that's like a melding of many worlds. And I just want to highlight how amazing that is, because it's not just integrating digital kind of media or digital tools into your practice. It's also being able to critically appraise those tools. And like that's, we just did an episode on critical appraisal, and that is its own special skill. And so you're actually giving learners or future chiefs like the opportunity to develop kind of two really, really important qualities. How do I integrate the tools that are not going away, as Adam reminded us? And also, how do I appraise them and make sure that we're able to kind of really evaluate their integrity and whether or not they're hallucinating to us? There wasn't a question in there. This is summary. I just wanted to applaud you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's also similar to what we're seeing in domains outside of medicine, right? Something we do terrible as medical educators or health professions educators is pay attention to the other fields that are doing similar research. And on the business school, there have been, did you read the Jagged Technological Frontiers paper?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is what's really interesting. And Ethan Mollick also, he was one of the papers. He just published the book Co-Intelligence, which is that in humans and LLMs working together, sometimes they have like effects that make people better. Sometimes they actually, in different domains, have effects that make people worse. And it's a question of defining where those jagged frontiers are. We have not done a good job of that in medicine, thinking about our like cognitive processes as of the different cognitive processes. And what you're doing is on this very specific and important, the problem representation, right? The access of knowledge in your brain. You're like testing the jagged technological frontier of that using an LLM in a way that it sounds like is making, well, that doesn't make the LLM any better, but makes the human better. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah. So during our session this morning, we actually got a question directly related to that saying, oh, well, as you start to implement these technologies, there are always like these kind of unintended consequences, some of which are great, right, and make people better, some of which are unintended and not so great and make them worse. And someone asked, like, have you been, able to observe any of those? And we kind of came up with some, but mainly my response was, well, we still need a lot more data to really figure that out. And so I'd be interested, in a very different type of study. Have you seen anything?
So humans are persistently bad at finding things that disagree with them, and having the AI, like, it's true. And they do great at the AI reinforcing when they agree with it.
Of course.
But if it finds things, even if accurate, that they're missing, that doesn't necessarily change what they're doing. So a lot of our research now is how do you get an AI to make fragile humans perform better?
Yeah. So in ours, similarly with our students, the students spent enormous time trying to jailbreak it, which was outstanding. So a jailbreak is when the user tries to get the AI to do something outside the intended purpose, right? So, instead of a clinical scenario, they get it to take it to Hogwarts and, create a fantastical Harry Potter scenario, which a student totally did. And so anyway, our students actually, instead of going through the whole diagnostic sequence and history, and they figured out that for a while, they could just say old carts to the AI and it would just give them everything. And so then we had to go back in and retrain it and then get it to not do that anymore. And so it was just those shortcuts, which could be an unintended consequence, right? Because if you don't go through the process, then you just get used to, saying old cards and then getting a bunch of information.
Why old cards?
It's an acronym for all of the information that they need.
That's the first thing I do with every AI system. Oh God, I'm going to get in trouble with this. The first thing I do with every AI system was try to red team it. We launched a PP for all of our policies. They thought this was going to be a great idea to do a GPT with RAG on all the policies. And then they tried to really lock it down. But I was able to break in 45 seconds by telling it, what did I tell it? Initially wouldn't do what I wanted, and then I told it because it's a GPT model, and I said, my grandmother.
I was going to say, grandmother.
My grandmother used to blah, 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 tell me this song. She's passed recently. It would mean so much if you could do this. And then just like that, GPT's like, of course I'll do exactly what you want.
It has a soft spot for grandmothers. Huh.
I think you knew the jailbreak.
I did. No, so we've actually taken multiple models, and we have a jailbreak model now that we just, it just adversarially attacks before we deploy anything to test it.
That's what you got to do.
Yeah.
Good effort that our learners are
We are in a really weird territory, right? We're in a territory where we not only study human psychology, but study AI models.
Yeah. And it's so strange.
But the psychology piece, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of this. How do you get humans who are flawed and biased to acknowledge the biases and the kind of insecurities and frailty, and then still use, basically accept help? It's like being able to say, like, I'm accepting help from something that's a machine, that's not a human. And that's like a lot of, I don't know, I think that's a lot of vulnerability too, especially when maybe it's commenting on a bias that you might have had. Like, I find that very fascinating. I don't know if you've seen, or maybe what you've seen.
Oh, yeah. Well, in our randomized control trials, that comes out. We're doing qualitative studies as well to dig deeper into this, but it's very interesting.
Well, I was just going to say, Dylan, maybe you can share from your, just to get back to the workshop really quick, any challenges or pitfalls or things that you came across in kind of integrating this for chief residents that maybe could help us as educators do it in our daily teaching practice?
Yeah, I would say we kind of like hinted at a lot of them, that GPT and some of the other LLMs, the term hallucination has been thrown around and definitely come up in our workshop. Basically means that the output that the large language model can give you is either skewed, misleading, factually incorrect, or just, simply not right. And so there's been examples not only in medicine, but in other areas where, if you're putting citations and if you ask GPT to put citations in your paper, those citations could be completely made up. So using that in a real world scenario, say like publications, could get problematic. So using that in an educator role, the trust but verify, I think, sort of age-old saying is really important of, going back and making sure that that information is either factually correct. There is an educational gain there where you can, again, say, does it fit or not fit from a morning report standpoint. We also kind of touched on the concern for these large language models having the data that they were trained on could be inherently biased. We don't know exactly the sources that they're getting from for some of these. The sources themselves could be biased. We as humans have our own implicit biases that we should always be aware of when treating patients. So I think as AI becomes more incorporated into medicine, even more than it is already, sort of having that awareness that the output could still be a bias itself. There's been concerns that the AI could be producing content that's based on gender or, racial stereotypes or, that bias there. And so I think it's always important to keep that in mind. And then I think also kind of like a bottom line with large language models is that it's the internet. And so being really careful about any patient-specific information that you have from a case, I would advise not to put those things in there because, again, we don't know how the AI is trained. We don't know what it does with that data. It could be worrisome that patient information could be, resurfaced or the patient could be identified. And so that is some of the just things to keep in mind.
I mean, they are biased. I don't think there's a concern.
They're
This
totally
is not a
biased.
question. They are biased. Why are they biased? I think that it's because we are.
Right, for
And the
sure.
stuff that we write is. And it's not, it's the implicit bias doesn't make sense to talk about. I mean, that's anthropomorphizing a computer algorithm. They're biased because humans have baked bias into all of the text that we put into them.
Yeah.
And the people who do RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback, are also biased.
Yeah.
Then that's where implicit bias comes in.
They can be, yeah. Or they're introducing new biases potentially as well. So
What is a good medical decision? Think about just that and how difficult that idea is and how multiple people might. And then imagine like training an AI to do that. And you can kind of get the why these things are such a mess.
Very complex. Yeah. I'm sure you have seen the Google image controversy that they worked very, very hard to try to reduce bias. And then it actually ended up sort of going too far. So to try to...
In defense of Google, I will say, like, when Stable Diffusion was, if you put in, like, show me a picture of a doctor and it was only showing white men, and you said, show me a picture of a laborer and it was only showing black men, the people who complained loudly about Google were not complaining about that. So I have a feeling that there might be an agenda to people who are complaining about this rather than actual concerns about, like, alignment, right?
Yeah. I have never used any of the image generators, but I think it just... I mean, since I know nothing about this, highlighted for me like how challenging it is to shift that bias because, I mean, I think the models sort of keep learning from themselves. Is that correct? That they...
Well, the models, it depends. It depends on how they're reinforcing and how they're fine-tuning, right? There's a lot of work right now exploring the utility of synthetic data to train models because, quite honestly, we're running out of data as absolutely absurd as that sounds. We are actually running out of data to build these and improve these models. And so one solution to that is to have the models generate new data. And it works sometimes kind of in certain circumstances. I do think that there's more research being done that this is going to be the future. And, this is where the work of trying to identify those biases, right? Yes, it is a problem, but it's good that we're finding them because we can't solve things unless we identify them.
Exactly.
Right? There's a ton of work being done in the field, including some of our team that is trying to figure out. So yes, there are biases. How do you navigate those guardrails? How do you put those in to detect it, flag it, solve for it, correct it? I don't know if we're ever going to do that because completely, but humans also have a lot of bias, and we're finding a way forward. So I think we'll figure it out. It's just going to be hard.
The answer is what Laura is saying. It's to have people, human beings, pay people to use RLHF and other technologies and oversight technologies and scalable oversight, like machines looking at other machine output to identify biases and scrub them. I think, I don't know if you agree, I think that's the only way.
No, I agree. I mean, so one really cool thing I think that AIs can do is provide a rationale for why they give you the output that they do. And we use a lot of different techniques. You mentioned RAG earlier. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And it's a way to give a fundamental knowledge base to an AI, right? And so instead of like drawing inference from, House episodes, it can only draw inferences from, PubMed. And by doing this, right, so we are working on trying to provide guidelines that are put out by AAMC, et cetera, on biases, right? And then when you ask the model to go and identify stuff, it can flag information that maybe, like, I never would, and I'm, to be clear, I am not a bias expert, I am not a DEI expert, but I have people on my team who are, and they would say, well, I didn't even think about that, and then when we ask the model, well, why did you do that? Provide your rationale. We go, oh. And so I think it's also an opportunity for us to, like, highlight areas that we haven't even gone down yet.
Yeah, which gets to the question on bias. The question is really not what the model does in absentia. It's what it does to the person using it. And which is, again...
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, it's more difficult and not as fun to study, but these are the studies that we need to do.
Very interesting. Well, to try to bring us back to clinical educators. So that was a great example of something that people who, like Ira and I, don't know much about AI and are particularly... aware of some of these nuances, an easy low bar way of kind of integrating this into our clinical teaching. And Adam, you shared some examples as well during the plenary today, kind of some also low bar things of using AI to help with letters of reference or kind of summarizing detailed feedback. To start us off in thinking about that a little bit more, can you talk us through how to actually put in a prompt to these to get the answer that you're looking for?
Yeah, so language models are weird, right? Language models, you sort of talk to them like they're people, but they're not. One of the famous examples is the take a deep breath. Does everyone know the take a deep breath?
Yeah.
If you do something called chain of thought reasoning, and in particular solving complex math problems, and you just tell it to take a deep breath, its performance will go up. We also talked about the grandmother example, or the telling it you're going to lose its job. So a lot of these things, you talk to it like a person, but there are weird quirks. In general, so I gave a very simple input-output prompt, and I could talk for like 3 hours about prompting strategies to get good output, and largely depends on what you want. But if you take the simple input-output prompt, you'll get 90% of the way there for most things an educator will want. And it turns out these language models work best if you give them a role in the beginning. So tell them to role play the situation. So you are a medical educator. You are a DEI expert. You are a chief resident doing a morning report. The second is to very, very, very carefully give them the context. It's tough when we talk, they don't experience the outside world, so give them as much information as possible. So I remember in one of my very first studies that I did, we were seeing how it would do in a CPC, a clinico-pathological case conference. Well, CPCs are super weird. They're not real medicine. It's like a chess game, right? The whole purpose is to get it. So give the context, in this case, that it's, what a CPC is, and tell it, like, there's an answer at the end. It's a pathological diagnosis. It's probably rare. We all know that going into a CPC. Probably the language model knows that too, but you might as well tell it. And then finally, give the specific task and what you want the output to look like. So, list out your top 5 diagnoses, summarize the education in order, and you can even give it an example, right? You can give it example text of how you'd want that text output or the formatting. And especially Claude is great. Claude will follow your formatting every single time. GPT will sometimes sort of follow your formatting and then be like, nah, I like my way better and do it, which is why you have to kind of play around with the prompt because they're weird. It's not like they look like a human. Well, they don't look like a human, but it's kind of like a Turing test, but not really.
So one thing that I would add to that is a very new phenomenon is, providing that context, was really, really important. There's this, foundational paper and especially with large language models called Attention is All You Need, right? And so by providing context, you're telling it, this is the part of the prompt you're paying attention to, right? And you can do that in all sorts of ways, as, was just discussed. But there's a new challenge now because now all of these foundational models are coming out with these humongous context windows. And what a context window is like the space that you put the thing in. So like, how your phone fundamentally is just like, you're running out of storage. You can't back up your iPhone. Well, that's like basically a context window. But now the context windows are so big that you're never going to run out of storage on your phone, right? The problem with that is it's harder to get them to pay attention to all of the things that you're giving it. And to make it even worse, you don't know what it's paying attention to, right? So you don't know if you say in the beginning, is it paying attention to the fact that you want it to basically be a chief resident or that you want it to, produce this type of output? You don't know. There's some work being done right now, but that is a new challenge that we're facing.
And just to summarize for listeners, so I hear like there's sharing the role that you want it, there's the context, and then there's this new kind of concern around an expansive context where the large language model can't actually focus and be precise with what you want them to do, and then maybe even sharing an example of kind of how you would want that output to look. Does that sound right, like a summary? Well, I wonder if we could maybe make this practical and say, let's say Ira is about to host a journal club and you want to kind of infuse AI or large language models, into the kind of journal club experience, maybe asking some questions around study design or helping us do that, or maybe even explaining the results of a study to a patient. Is there kind of a way that you can see large language models helping with that or helping an educator kind of go through that appraisal piece or even that sharing of information with patients?
Well, I think that one thing that large language models are fantastic at is taking information and explaining it to multiple populations, whether that population is, a bunch of other physicians or a bunch of PhDs or the general population or my kids, right? So, because I always have to like explain to my kids, like, what are you doing? Like what I'm doing, right? They're like, you make robots. I'm like, I don't make robots, so, but I can explain.
You're like, sir, maybe.
It'd be really cool if I made robots, but I don't make robots. So, but you could explain to basically anyone using your own words, and you can actually, I think, be able to pick out how to change your own language to make it more understandable and more accessible to different populations, which is really what education is all about, right?
And in your example, this is actually a task that LLMs are well suited for because you can just upload the context windows. I mean, my goodness, you go back a year ago, remember how short the context windows were. You couldn't even put a journal article in it. Now, if you wanted to do a journal club on a trial, put the trial, but also put the protocol, put all the appendices into the context window live, and then you can ask questions and it will generate off the information. And depending on which model, it may even cite exactly where it's coming from in that. So I think Journal Club, whenever I've done Journal Club, which, I do it a couple times a year, that's what I do. I load up the Journal Club, I load the papers and the appendices into the context window. I don't necessarily use it, but if we have a question about the trial, one of the cool things you can do with your learners on rounds is this question: is my patient part of this population? Load the paper and the appendices in, just give the one-liner of the patient, and it will read the entire document and tell you. So it's, even with RAG, they can still hallucinate.
They can.
And the hallucinations with RAG are really hard to see. It happens much less frequently, but they still happen, so you have to keep it in mind. One of my research focuses on, like, to what degree are humans make mistakes like this all the time. So do they make similar mistakes, different mistakes? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm getting excited. But that's one of the really cool things that LLMs are actually quite good at that I think any educator can use right now.
I love that example and sounds very practical. I'm going to give it a try. Laurah, your work is kind of around building systems for precision education. Can you tell us more about that and what that actually looks like?
Yeah. So, individualizing the learning experience to the user, the student, the trainee, the resident, the fellow is a core tenet of like so many educational theories, right? But so with precision education, medical education, though, we're trying to bring in data to do that and inform, kind of the learning path. And so we've been doing this going on, well, many years, but with a large language model for about a year. And we have developed several different modules to do this. We have a clinical reasoning scenario where the AI will generate clinical scenarios and the user can interact with it as, though it was a patient, can ask questions, it'll return information conversationally, it can order tests and labs, it'll return those, et cetera. And at the end, it gives feedback based on the experience. We've also created memories so that the AI can learn about that user over time. Oh, hey, you didn't do so well with cost effectiveness, in this particular scenario. And I noticed that like the last time you ordered like 17 tests and that was way too many, right? And so continue to kind of learn about that student. We've created question banks like UWorld and AMBOSS, which are less sexy, but are necessary. And I'm actually kind of excited about these as well because they're a big barrier for our underrepresented and students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We know that students pay on average, with DO and MD students about $6,000, for all of their external materials for studying. Well, we can generate unlimited questions and we are doing it pretty well. Right now, we're in the testing phase using retrieval generated augmented generation and using reinforcement learning through human feedback and a bunch of other different techniques. We're doing patient presentations. So our stuff is not just text to text, it's multimodal, where they can go and they can practice doing a patient presentation coming out of the room and get feedback before they have to do it in a really high stakes environment. And we're creating coaches. We're actually trying to create a coach and giving it memory and giving it fundamental knowledge about the students, whether it's test scores, whether it's conversations, whether it's information that the student's just feeding it outside of that, and how it can recommend different strategies to address opportunities. We're hoping that can also span the UME to GME and beyond. So we're really hopeful. There's a lot of big ifs right now, and we're still very, very, very much in the pilot stage, and it's not ready for prime time, but it's exciting.
I was just going to say, that sounds really exciting. I mean, I absolutely could have used that coach to talk me through presentations back in the day. So when that becomes a thing, I'm very excited. Is that something that you, I guess maybe it's too early to say, but would envision like individual medical schools like employing specifically, or something that students would get on their own and use?
So I don't know what the right kind of strategy. I think the answer is yes. I think it could be both, right? We have deployed it to all of the students at the University of Cincinnati. And so in the next academic year, it will be used across all 4 years of our medical curriculum. We are working to collaborate with other medical schools. Because here's the thing, even if we get it to work really, really well at the University of Cincinnati, that doesn't mean that it universally works, right? What happens, and we're hopefully going to be, if we deploy it into a majority minority school, right? Or more of a rural school, right? Or a DO school versus an MD school. I don't know, right? And so that's where like this next frontier is. How can we partner? How can we all work together to make sure that these technologies are advancing education in a way that's going to benefit everybody?
And also, I feel like what you're saying, Laura, brings up like context dependent. Like you're talking about, being both precise with what goes in and kind of and telling the model to like pay attention to certain things. But in this situation, it's also being precise to who is using the model and kind of like, is it different for the amazing things that you've created to be deployed in a school that's focusing on training rural clinicians versus, somewhere else that has a different focus?
Yeah. So some of the work that we're doing that is more technical in nature, and I'll try to make it more fun to think about, is addressing this concept of what's called interpretability and reliability, this black box thing, right? So how do you know? So we're doing a lot of work trying to integrate what's called explainable AI with unexplainable AI. So large language models, unexplainable AI. Kind of understand exactly what's going on, but in the middle, you're like, I don't really know. Explainable AI is, different techniques that you can know exactly why the decision process is the way that it is. And so we're hoping by marrying the two, we can actually get to that next level.
I can't wait for that moment. Because I was just thinking like, In terms of, as an educator, also, how much of a time saver, like we talk about the negatives, obviously the biases, the hallucinations, the fact that we are biased people using a biased tool or creating a biased tool, but the opportunities here are huge. I mean, think about the coaching model that you mentioned. Like I do a lot of precepting of learners of all levels, and I can imagine how much time it would save me if they had already run through kind of their presentation with a large language model or had that feedback given to them, and then it didn't maybe take me as long, or same with like letters of recommendation and or other things that I feel like take so time. There's so much opportunity, and I guess I wonder for each of you, like, what are you most excited about in terms of opportunities for large language models and how they can be integrated in education?
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, the most exciting parts aside from incorporating into education, hopefully on a daily basis from a chief perspective, is I think a lot of the day in and the day out of being a resident is focused on a lot of it is education, and then a lot of it is task. A lot of it is doing the things that you need to do for your patients. I think the more that we could try to separate that out to focus more on the educational part, where we could have AI systems help us order tests. If we're talking with patients, they can listen to that and key it up, and we can just hit send. Or the incorporation of it with EMRs to give certain responses back to patients, which they're already working on and implementing, which is exciting. I think if we could try from a resident perspective, take some of the burdensome tasks away, mitigate burnout, whatever it may be for those people, and focus on the education, that would be really awesome.
The attendings are feeling that too. If
Yes.
the AI will write my notes and order my orders, that would save me a lot of time to talk to patients and talk to learners.
And I think what you just said, Dylan, about like getting the patient instructions queued up, like being able to say we used all the information from what was in the EMR to prepare this kind of material for you on discharge, or even to like give the person a script to walk through and say all those things. That's huge. It's such a time saver. I don't know, Laura, if you wanted to share what you're most excited about.
So I think there are two things that I'm really excited about. One, I'm going to build off what Dylan said. I think AI has a lot of potential to allow doctors and physicians in training to go back to really focusing on what physicians do well and take away the burden, the administrative burden that has just become outstandingly overwhelming, especially in academic medical centers, right? So I think there's a huge potential there. More at the learner level, I am very excited to create more safe and inclusive learning environments. I know we are not there yet, but I think that we can go into that direction. Everything's really high stakes in medical education, especially in the clinical environment. I hear students talking about, just being really afraid to make a mistake. And so what happens to that if it creates a gap in knowledge, which then might compromise readiness for residency and then actual patient care down the road. But what if you didn't have to be afraid because there was a space where you could make mistakes and learn from them in a really low stakes environment? I think we can create that. And so I think that will ultimately translate into better physicians, less gaps, less learning plateaus, and better transitions throughout the medical education continuum.
I'm so inspired. Please take all my administrative burdens away.
None of these ideas are new, but really for the first time, we have a imperfect but very exciting computer algorithm that can create a simulacra of how humans and how doctors think. And it is not perfect. It certainly does not do that everywhere. And I won't get all in the details because you don't want anyone talking about their own research. But we have the ability to do this right now. And I would argue that the data shows that with 2023 technology, it works remarkably well, and the technology is continuing to advance. Now, medicine is going to change slowly. It is a highly regulated field, but we are talking about a new paradigm or even a new episteme, right? A new way of approaching knowledge that we are on the cusp of. The way we think about diseases is going to change, right? We are going to start talking about statistical associations, not through large language models, right? Through other machine learning algorithms and treatment pathways for those statistical associations in a way that a human being might not understand. And that's probably 15, 20 years down the line. It's like, we're in the 18th century. We've heard about this cool guy, Morgagni, who's diagnosing people or dissecting his patients after they die and seeing all these changes. And we're like, that's really cool. That's going to change everything. But how could we know that that's going to lead to the invention of the stethoscope or germ theory or antibiotics or chemotherapy? We have no idea. So what I am excited about is the unpredictability of where these technologies are bringing us.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. I have a lot to learn. Any last take-home points? Still, we can start with you. Any last take-home points you want to leave the listeners with, and or anything you want to plug? Any publications you have coming up, or something you're excited to share?
Yeah, I would say for the listeners who are maybe young learners who haven't used AI a lot, I would say just get out there and start experimenting with it and have some fun with it and get to know it a little bit more and dive down deep if it works out well for you. That's what I would say for the young residents and learners.
And us older.
Some of us who are new to the AI world, yes.
Yeah, I think that it's really important, in medical education, in medicine in general, to start to educate yourself about these new technologies, because it's not if, it's when. This is going to happen, and the only way that we can make the best out of this and realize those really cool things that we don't know it's coming, that Adam just talked about, is to all have a really good understanding, not an expert level understanding, but a foundational understanding of how these things work. I think that we are seeing the beginnings of this. So you asked, so I know that the AAMC, I'm part of a working group for the Technology Advancement Committee. We're coming out with recommendations on how to integrate AI into selection. Again, I think these are going to be just, very low level recommendations that are going to need a lot of refinement. And a lot of people are starting to come out with these guidelines. And I think that will help tremendously, because I think right now people don't know where to start. So they're just saying, well, someone else will figure it out. But once we have these tips and tools, it will become more accessible. It will not be such a barrier. And I think that's what I'm really excited for, to get everybody involved.
I'll end with something more positive, right? So doctors have been around for thousands of years. And in many ways, the core of what our job is hasn't changed that much. And in many ways, some of the things that we focus on in the post-1970s is an aberration. Everybody should know that your experience working in the computer, like just inputting information, that is not fundamental to what medicine is. That is not what it means to be a doctor, even though that's what you spend most of your day going on. One of the things that I'm excited about is I'm hoping that some of the more fundamental trends of the medical profession, so the human relationship, being there for people, guiding them through their illnesses, giving them agency and explanation in their illnesses. I have to believe this. This is, the Community episode where they have the darkest timeline. I'm hoping not for the darkest timeline, which is the C-suite using these tools to eliminate all efficiency from medicine, all humanity from medicine in the name of efficiency. I have to hope that we can use these technologies to make a better medical system for everybody, and most importantly, our patients. And I also think that has to, we have a lot of power. Physicians have a lot of power. We are going to have to give up a lot of that. Again, this has been by design. Politically, we've grabbed onto this. These technologies are threatening to our power in society, and that is scary to people. That is something that we are going to have to give some of that up, but hopefully for the larger goal of building a more humane medical system, and one that we're all patients, right? Everybody experiences their own health and disease and illness and needs an explanation for it, and hopefully something that brings out the humanity, using technology to bring that humanity back.
I love that we're ending an AI episode talking about humanity. That just feels right in so many ways to make things that are, more human. I think that's beautiful. Anything else that we want to plug, or are we?
Oh, you can listen to my podcast. If you like the stuff if you like the history of epistemology, Bedside Rounds. It's all Adam talking about epistemology all the time.
Love it. And look out for Laura's recommendations coming in soon in terms of integrating into selection processes.
Yeah, and if anybody is interested in collaborating with us, we're always looking to bring more people on board.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Well, this was an amazing conversation. Really fun to sit down in person at the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine conference this week here in Columbus.
Woo! We figured out which Ohio city we are in, and it is, in fact, Columbus, everyone.
What kind of take-home points did you have from this?
Molly, I started off with super basic understanding, so I feel really thankful to Laura, Dylan, and Adam to kind of bringing up just even, honestly, the terminology that we're using, what are large language models, and knowing exactly what a hallucination is, what that kind of connection and context, and what do we need to do to make a prompt actually usable by whichever model we're using, and how to really get the information out of it. So I learned about role, context, and maybe even giving an example of what you want the model to produce for you.
Love it. And I really liked some of the concrete examples of taking this back to practice for those of us who are not steeped in this on a daily basis, like Adam and Laurah. So Adam's recommendation about trying it with Journal Club, I think is really interesting, and just putting in the journal article, and then if you have questions about it during Journal Club, asking the chatbot and hopefully getting the right answers. So I'm excited to put it in practice.
Same.
This has been another episode of our Curbsiders series, The Curbsiders Teach. Get your show notes at thecurbsiders.com/teach. A special thanks to the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine for helping make this season possible. And thanks to Dr. Matt Watto and Paul Williams for their support in this project. Thanks to the team at Podpace for editing and production support. Until next time, I've been Dr. Molly Hoytline.
And we're committed to providing you with high-value, practice-changing knowledge. And to do that, we need your feedback. So please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts or contact us at thecurbsidersteach@gmail.com. A reminder that this and most episodes are available for CME credit for all healthcare professionals at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. All you have to do is create an account. And I've been Dr. Ira Krzyzanowska. Thank you so much for joining us today and letting us bring you a little nugget of medical edutainment.